Dostoevsky's warning about mass psychology. Section 1. The Hook and the Great Question. Imagine walking through a crowded street, surrounded by thousands of faces, each convinced they're thinking their own thoughts, making their own choices. But what if you discovered that nearly every decision you've made today, what you wore, what you ate, even what made you angry, wasn't really yours at all? What if the most terrifying prison isn't made of bars and concrete, but of invisible psychological chains that make you love your captivity? Picture yourself in 19th century St. Petersburg, standing in the same squares where Fyodor Dostoevsky once watched crowds gather, their individual minds dissolving into something else entirely, something that made him recoil in horror. He saw what you're seeing now, only he understood its true nature. In those faces he recognized a force so subtle yet so powerful that it could turn rational humans into instruments of their own destruction, all while they celebrated their supposed freedom. You think you're immune. Everyone does. That's precisely what makes it work. Consider this paradox. Why do entire populations suddenly embrace ideas they would have found repulsive just months before? Why do intelligent individuals, when merged into a crowd, commit acts that would horrify them in isolation? More disturbing still, why do they feel righteous while doing it? Dostoevsky witnessed this transformation firsthand. As a young man, he stood before a firing squad seconds from death for the crime of reading forbidden books in a small group. That moment of facing extinction for the simple act of thinking differently seared into his consciousness a truth that would haunt his greatest works. The human mind, when absorbed into the collective, becomes capable of anything and believes itself justified in everything. You feel it, don't you? That slight discomfort when you voice an opinion that differs from your group, that subtle pressure to conform, to smooth out your rough edges, to think what others think, not because someone forces you, but because something in your own mind insists upon it. This isn't weakness. This is the human condition encountering its most primal vulnerability. The question that tormented Dostoevsky, that should torment you, is this: if your thoughts aren't entirely your own, if your desires are manufactured, if your outrage is orchestrated, then who are you really? And perhaps more urgently, who is pulling the strings? In The Brothers Karamazov, Dostoevsky embedded a warning so prescient it reads like prophecy. Through the Grand Inquisitor, he revealed how humanity would trade its freedom for bread, certainty, and the comfort of not having to think. But even he couldn't foresee how sophisticated the mechanisms would become, how the mass mind would evolve from torch-bearing mobs to something far more insidious. Crowds that gather not in squares but in digital spaces, their fury directed not by demagogues but by algorithms that know your desires better than you do. You're living in the world Dostoevsky warned about, only it's worse than he imagined, because at least his characters knew when they were in prison. You? You're scrolling through your cage, liking and sharing the very bars that confine you, believing each click is an act of individual expression. The most terrifying insight Dostoevsky offers isn't that mass psychology exists, it's that it feels like freedom, it feels like righteousness, it feels like you. What follows isn't comfortable. It's an excavation of the forces that shape your mind without your permission, the ancient psychological patterns that modern technology has weaponized, and the reason why Dostoevsky, a man who stared into the abyss of human nature and didn't blink, believed that the greatest threat to human dignity wasn't tyranny imposed from above, but the tyranny we impose upon ourselves when we surrender to the intoxicating comfort of the crowd. The question now is, are you ready to see what you've been participating in? Because once you understand what Dostoevsky saw, you can't unsee it, and that terrifying clarity might be your only chance at genuine freedom. Section 2. The Hidden Problem and its Psychological Philosophical Roots. The problem begins in a place you'd never suspect, your desperate need to belong, not just to fit in, but to exist at all. Because here's what Dostoevsky understood that most miss: you don't first exist and then join groups. Your very sense of self emerges from the groups that claim you before you can even speak. Think about it. Your first experience of existence wasn't as an individual, but as part of something larger. A family, a culture, a language that shaped your thoughts before you knew what thinking was. Schopenhauer called this the will to life, but Dostoevsky saw deeper. He recognized that this will operates not through individuals, but through collectives that use individuals as vessels for their own perpetuation. This is where Jung's collective unconscious becomes terrifying. Those ancient patterns of behavior, those archetypal forces. They don't serve you, you serve them. When you feel that surge of righteous anger alongside others, when you experience that intoxicating unity of purpose with a group, you're not connecting with your true self. You're being possessed by psychological patterns that have survived precisely because they're so effective at overriding individual thought. Dostoevsky watched this possession in real time. In Demons, he dissected how educated, rational people could be swept into revolutionary fervor that destroyed everything they claimed to value. But he saw something his contemporaries missed. The ideas themselves were less dangerous than the psychological mechanisms that spread them. Like a virus that hijacks cellular machinery, mass movements don't convince, they infect. Nietzsche, writing shortly after Dostoevsky, identified this as the herd instinct, but even he underestimated its sophistication. It doesn't simply make you follow others. It makes you believe that following is leading, that conformity is rebellion, that your surrender is actually victory. The mass mind doesn't announce itself as mass mind. It disguises itself as your most authentic self. Consider how this works neurologically. When you align with group beliefs, your brain rewards you with dopamine. When you deviate, it punishes you with cortisol and social anxiety. You're biochemically programmed to conform, and every time you do, the neural pathways deepen. What starts as social pressure becomes genuine belief. You're not pretending to agree. You literally cannot think otherwise. But here's where Dostoevsky's genius reveals itself. He understood that the mass mind needs enemies more than allies. It defines itself not by what it loves, but by what it hates. In The Brothers Karamazov, the elder Zosima observes that people bond more strongly over shared antipathy than shared affection. Why? Because hatred provides what love cannot: absolute certainty. When you hate together with others, doubt vanishes. The complex becomes simple. The ambiguous becomes clear. You know exactly who you are because you know exactly who you're against. This is why every mass movement, regardless of its stated goals, eventually becomes about destroying enemies rather than building paradise. Sartre called this bad faith, the comfort of denying your freedom by pretending you have no choice. But Dostoevsky saw that bad faith isn't individual, it's collective. Groups don't just pressure you to conform, they offer you the gift of not having to choose. In the mass mind, responsibility dissolves. You're just following the logic of history, the will of the people, the demands of justice. Never your own decisions, never your own guilt. Viktor Frankl, surviving the Nazi camps, witnessed this dissolution of individual responsibility taken to its logical extreme. He saw how ordinary people became monsters not through personal evil, but through surrender to the group mind. But he also saw something Dostoevsky predicted. Those who maintained their humanity did so by accepting the terrible burden of individual choice, even when, especially when, the group offered them the comfort of just following orders. The philosophical root runs deeper still. Heidegger identified the they, das Man, the anonymous public that thinks for you, speaks through you, lives your life while you sleep. You say, they say, or everyone knows, without asking who they are. This isn't laziness, it's existential terror. Because to think for yourself, truly for yourself, means confronting the possibility that everything you believe might be wrong. And this is precisely what the mass mind protects you from. It offers certainty in exchange for consciousness, belonging in exchange for being. Dostoevsky saw people making this trade eagerly, gratefully, violently defending the very force that enslaved them. The hidden problem isn't that mass psychology is imposed on unwilling victims. The hidden problem is that we crave it, create it, and punish anyone who threatens to wake us from its comfortable sleep. Section 3. The unseen consequences. You wake up anxious without knowing why. You scroll through your phone and within minutes you're angry about something happening thousands of miles away to people you'll never meet. By noon, you've experienced more emotional extremes than your ancestors felt in a month, and you call this normal. This is mass psychology's masterpiece. It has colonized not just your thoughts, but your nervous system itself. Your body now responds to abstract threats as if they were tigers in the grass. Cortisol floods your system from words on a screen. Your fight or flight response activates from opinions that differ from yours. You're living in a perpetual state of biological emergency, and the mass mind feeds on your fear like a parasite. Dostoevsky predicted this in Notes from Underground, where his protagonist declares, "I am a sick man. I am a spiteful man." But the sickness isn't individual, it's civilizational. When everyone is triggered all the time, when outrage becomes the dominant emotion, when peace feels like betrayal, you're not witnessing random social decay. You're seeing mass psychology's inevitable endpoint, a society of people who mistake their chains for armor. The cognitive bias most central to this imprisonment is confirmation bias, but not as typically understood. It's not just that you seek information confirming your beliefs. It's that the mass mind pre-selects what counts as information at all. Facts that challenge group consensus don't get rejected. They literally become invisible. Your brain, hijacked by tribal loyalty, develops selective blindness that you experience as clarity. Consider the last time you changed your mind about something significant. Can't remember. That's not stubbornness. That's your neural pathways, carved deep by group reinforcement, making deviation feel physically impossible. The mass mind doesn't need to censor dissent when it can make dissent unthinkable. But the consequences run deeper than personal rigidity. When millions of minds synchronize in this way, reality itself begins to fracture. Dostoevsky saw this in pre-revolutionary Russia. Competing groups didn't just disagree about solutions, they lived in entirely different worlds. What one group saw as liberation, another saw as destruction. What one experienced as justice, another experienced as persecution. The same events, filtered through different mass minds, became unrecognizable. You're living this fracture now. You've probably lost friends, not to death but to diverging realities. People you once loved now seem like strangers, speaking an alien language. This isn't political difference, it's psychological speciation. The mass mind has split humanity into subspecies that can no longer comprehend each other's experience. The personal cost is devastating. Your capacity for nuance atrophies. Your ability to hold paradox withers. You begin to see the world in binaries, us and them, good and evil, enlightened and ignorant. This isn't just intellectual limitation, it's spiritual death. Dostoevsky understood that the human soul requires complexity to remain alive. When the mass mind reduces everything to simple formulas, it doesn't just dumb you down, it kills the part of you capable of genuine insight. Watch yourself in conversation. Notice how certain topics make your body tense, your voice change, your mind close. That's not you. That's the mass mind's defense system activating. It has programmed you to protect the group narrative with the same intensity your ancestors protected their physical tribe. Except now, the threat isn't starvation or predators. It's anyone who might make you think. The neurological rewiring goes deeper still. Studies show that political tribalism activates the same brain regions as religious fundamentalism. When you defend your group's position, you're not engaging in rational discourse. You're performing a sacred ritual. The mass mind has literally turned you into its priest, and your outrage is your offering. This explains why facts don't change minds anymore. When someone presents evidence contradicting your group's beliefs, your brain doesn't process it as information. It processes it as blasphemy. The stronger the evidence, the more violent the rejection. You're not defending ideas. You're defending your entire identity architecture. Dostoevsky saw this sacred dimension of mass psychology and recognized its demonic inversion. In The Brothers Karamazov, when Ivan's devil appears, he doesn't come as a monster, but as a shabby gentleman spouting the conventional wisdom of the day. Evil's greatest trick isn't making you do wrong, it's making wrong feel like righteousness, especially when everyone around you agrees. The economic consequences are equally invisible yet devastating. You buy things not because you need them, but because they signal group membership. You pursue careers that impress others rather than fulfill you. You live in places, wear clothes, eat foods that broadcast your tribal affiliation. The mass mind has turned your entire life into a performance, and you've forgotten your acting. But perhaps the most insidious consequence is what Dostoevsky called the right to dishonor. The mass mind's permission to be cruel in service of the cause. When the group declares someone an enemy, you don't just disagree with them, you dehumanize them. You feel justified in destroying their reputation, their livelihood, their peace. And the more viciously you attack, the more virtuous you feel. This is mass psychology's darkest magic. It makes you feel most moral when you're being most monstrous. It converts your capacity for empathy into a weapon, directing compassion only toward your tribe while reserving cruelty for outsiders. You become capable of simultaneously weeping for abstract victims while destroying concrete individuals. The cultural consequences compound exponentially. Art becomes propaganda. Science becomes dogma. Education becomes indoctrination. Every institution meant to preserve individual thought gets conscripted into mass mind maintenance. Universities that should challenge consensus instead enforce it. Media that should inform instead inflames. Technology that should connect instead divides. You see this but feel powerless to resist because resistance itself has been pathologized. The mass mind has made thinking dangerous, questioning suspicious, independence selfish. It has created a world where the only acceptable response to its dominance is submission disguised as enthusiasm. Section 4. The Rebellion. How to break free. The first step to freedom is the most painful. Admitting you're not free. Not partially influenced, not somewhat affected. Enslaved. Until you feel the full weight of your chains, you'll never generate the force needed to break them. Dostoevsky discovered this through suffering. In Siberian prison camps, stripped of every comfort and illusion, he found something unexpected: clarity. When you can't hide behind group identity, when you're reduced to bare existence, you discover what's actually yours and what's been implanted. This is why his post-prison works pulse with such fierce independence. He had touched the bedrock of individual consciousness. You don't need Siberia, but you need its psychological equivalent: voluntary exile from the mass mind. This doesn't mean physical isolation. That's just another trap. It means something far more difficult: thinking without a net, without the comfort of group validation, without the drug of shared certainty. Start with this experiment. Take one belief you hold sacred, one position that feels fundamentally right, and spend a week genuinely trying to understand its opposite. Not to debate it, not to disprove it, to understand it so deeply you could argue it better than its advocates. Feel that resistance, that physical revulsion? That's not your conviction, that's your conditioning. Your authentic beliefs can withstand examination. The mass mind's implants cannot. Nietzsche called this philosophizing with a hammer, but Dostoevsky went deeper. He didn't just want to shatter false idols, he wanted to understand why we create them. In Crime and Punishment, Raskolnikov doesn't just commit murder, he commits the deeper crime of believing his ideas matter more than human reality. His redemption comes not through changing his beliefs, but through encountering actual suffering, actual love, forces that exist outside ideology's reach. This points to the counterintuitive solution. You don't fight the mass mind with better ideas. You starve it by feeding what it cannot digest: direct experience, genuine relationship, embodied presence. The mass mind thrives on abstraction. It dies in the particular. Consider how revolutionaries become tyrants, how movements for liberation create new forms of bondage. It's not corruption, it's inevitability. When you fight the mass mind on its own terms, using its own weapons of ideology and group formation, you've already lost. You're not creating freedom. You're creating a new flavor of slavery. The real rebellion is quieter, stranger, more radical. It begins with what Dostoevsky called the refusal to bow down. Not to this group or that group, to the very principle of group supremacy over individual conscience. This isn't individualism as commonly understood. That's just another mass mind product. This is something far more dangerous: the willingness to be wrong alone, without the comfort of either conformity or rebellion. Watch what happens when you stop performing your opinions. When someone expects you to signal tribal loyalty, neither agree nor disagree, ask a genuine question. When the group demands outrage, offer curiosity. When everyone knows the answer, admit ignorance. These aren't tactics, they're practices in recovering your own mind. The mass mind's power comes from speed. It needs you to react instantly, emotionally, predictably. Every pause you take, every moment of genuine reflection, weakens its hold. This is why Dostoevsky's characters think so much, why his novels move so slowly. He's showing you the pace of actual thought, which is glacial compared to groupthink's lightning. But here's what makes this rebellion genuinely radical. You can't do it to prove you're special. The moment you turn your independence into another identity, another badge of superiority, you've been recaptured. The mass mind is perfectly happy to let you feel unique as long as you're still playing its game of comparison and competition. True freedom looks like what Dostoevsky found in prison, the ability to maintain human dignity not through asserting your differences, but through recognizing your commonality. The deepest rebellion against mass psychology isn't standing apart from others. It's standing with them as individuals, not as members. This requires developing what Viktor Frankl called the last human freedom, the ability to choose your response regardless of circumstances. But unlike Frankl's focus on meaning-making, Dostoevsky points to something more basic, the freedom to suffer without explanation, to doubt without resolution, to be without justification. The practical path is mundane yet radical. Cultivate real relationships with people who disagree with you. Read books that challenge your worldview without trying to refute them. Sit with discomfort without reaching for the phone. Let conversations end without consensus. Allow yourself to be changed by encounter rather than defended by ideology. Notice how the mass mind immediately objects. But what about justice? What about truth? What about fighting evil? These are its favorite disguises. It makes you believe that independence equals indifference, that thinking for yourself means abandoning morality. The opposite is true. Only individual conscience, tested in solitude and refined through genuine encounter, can produce actual justice rather than its ideological simulacrum. Dostoevsky's answer to mass psychology isn't better psychology, it's love. Not the abstract love of humanity that revolutionaries proclaim while destroying actual humans, but the difficult love of the particular, this person, this moment, this irreducible reality that refuses to fit your categories. Section 5. The ultimate truth, the final, most powerful realization. Here's what Dostoevsky understood that changes everything. The mass mind isn't your enemy, it's your teacher. Every moment of its tyranny, every instance of your submission, every time you've chosen belonging over being, all of it has been preparing you for this recognition. You needed to be enslaved to understand freedom. You needed to be absorbed to discover individuality. You needed to lose yourself completely, to find what can never be lost. This isn't consolation, it's the architecture of human consciousness itself. In The Brothers Karamazov, Alyosha achieves what seems impossible. He remains connected to others without losing himself, loves humanity without despising humans, stays engaged with the world without being devoured by it. How? He discovered the secret that makes mass psychology ultimately powerless. You are not your thoughts, your beliefs, your group affiliations. You are the awareness that observes all of these, the consciousness that remains free even in the midst of the greatest conformity. This isn't spiritual bypassing or philosophical abstraction. It's the most practical insight possible. When you realize that your true self exists prior to and beyond any group identity, the mass mind loses its leverage. It can still influence your thoughts, trigger your emotions, shape your behavior, but it cannot touch the core of what you are. Think about what this means. Every time you've betrayed your conscience for group approval, every moment you've silenced your truth for belonging, your essential self remained untouched, waiting. Not judging, not condemning, just waiting for you to remember what you've always known. You are free. Not because you've earned it or achieved it, but because freedom is the fundamental fact of consciousness itself. Dostoevsky saw this in the moment before the firing squad, when everything false fell away. Facing death, he discovered that even if they killed his body, imprisoned his mind, destroyed his identity, something would remain that no force could touch. This isn't faith or hope or belief. It's direct recognition of what you are beneath what you think you are. The mass mind's ultimate illusion is making you believe you need its permission to exist. Every advertisement, every social pressure, every ideological demand carries the same implicit threat: conform or cease to matter. But here's the revolution disguised as revelation. You already matter. Your existence needs no justification, no group validation, no ideological vindication. The moment you truly understand this, the entire architecture of mass psychology collapses. This is why Dostoevsky's greatest characters achieve freedom through surrender, not to the group, but to reality itself. When Raskolnikov finally confesses, when Dmitri accepts his suffering, when Ivan confronts his devil, they're not submitting to external authority. They're abandoning the exhausting pretense that they can think their way into being. They're discovering that existence precedes essence, that you first are, then you choose. But here's the final twist that makes this insight truly transformative. Once you discover your inviolable freedom, you can return to the world of groups and movements and shared beliefs. But now as a participant, not a prisoner. You can join without being absorbed, contribute without being consumed, belong without disappearing. This is the paradox that breaks the mass mind's binary logic. True individuality doesn't separate you from others. It makes genuine connection possible. When you're not desperately protecting your group identity, you can actually see others. When you're not performing your beliefs, you can actually think. When you're not afraid of exile, you can actually love. The ultimate truth isn't that you should reject all groups, all movements, all collective action. It's that you should enter them consciously, freely, without surrendering your essential autonomy. You can be a member without being a mob, united without being uniform, together without being the same. Dostoevsky spent his life warning about mass psychology, not because he hated humanity, but because he loved it enough to demand its freedom, even from itself. His warning echoes across the centuries with increasing urgency. The choice isn't between individual and collective. The choice is between conscious participation and unconscious absorption, between being awake in the group or asleep in the crowd. You stand now where his characters stood, at the crossroads between comfortable slavery and terrifying freedom. The mass mind offers you everything: purpose, identity, belonging, certainty. All it asks in return is everything: your conscience, your consciousness, your capacity to choose. But you've seen too much now. You've glimpsed what Dostoevsky saw, that beneath every group identity, beyond every collective certainty, prior to every mass movement, there exists an irreducible kernel of individual consciousness that no force can capture. You are that consciousness. You have always been free. The question isn't whether you'll use this freedom. You can't not use it. The question is whether you'll use it consciously or unconsciously, whether you'll choose your choices or let them be chosen for you, whether you'll live as an individual who can join groups or as a group member who has forgotten how to be alone. The firing squad is always assembled. The trigger is always about to be pulled. And in that eternal moment before the bullets fly, you discover what Dostoevsky discovered. They can take everything except your freedom to face them with eyes open. This is his warning. This is his gift. This is your inheritance. Now choose.